He was a battle-hardened Navy SEAL, a man who had walked through war with only his loyal K-9 by his side. But one stormy night on Raven Bay, everything changed. His dog, his partner, his lifeline, vanished into the darkness. And a young vet trainee with a gentle heart found him bleeding on the cliffs. She didn't know the danger waiting in the shadows. And she didn't know the soldier who would fight through the night to save them both. This is a story about healing, courage, and the miracle that happens when a wounded heart finally finds the light again. If this journey moves you, hit subscribe, like, and comment to join our growing family of hope and compassion. Winds carved through Raven Bay like a mournful hymn rising from the sea. The storm had begun gathering long before the first thunder cracked open the sky, rolling toward Raven Bay with the slow confidence of something ancient and inevitable. The small coastal town braced itself beneath heavy clouds the color of wet stone. Out on the bluff, where the pines leaned toward the sea as if straining to remember a forgotten tragedy, a lone cabin waited for its owner, creaking with each gust like it recognized the footsteps returning to it. Elias Kane stepped out of the government-issued SUV and inhaled sharply as the cold wind struck his face. He didn't flinch. He never really did anymore. At 34, he carried the disciplined stillness of a man who had learned to survive by silencing the unnecessary. His body, tall and powerfully built, moved with a deliberate economy, every motion honed through years of conditioning where hesitation cost lives. Broad shoulders stretched beneath a damp navy jacket, muscles defined like sculpted armor beneath the fabric. His skin was tanned from desert suns, his jaw square and perpetually tight as though clenched around memories he couldn't let go of. His hair, dark brown trimmed close in a military crop, still carried flecks of gray dust from foreign battlefields, despite his recent shower at the base. But it was his eyes, steel blue, tired, and endlessly searching, that betrayed him. There was a crack in them, barely visible unless one stared long enough, a fracture left by something that had followed him home from overseas. Elias wasn't a man who ran from danger. He was a man who had run out of ways to hide from what danger had carved inside him. 9 months away, 3 operations, 1 failed extraction he never spoke about, except in nightmares so vivid they yanked him out of sleep gasping for breath. The Navy called him a decorated SEAL. Civilians called him a hero. His teammates called him unbreakable. Elias himself suspected he was simply a man who hadn't yet learned how to fall apart. He shut the SUV door quietly. Noise felt disrespectful tonight. The cabin, small and made of weathered cedar, sat directly above the crashing waves of Raven Bay. Warm light glowed faintly from the porch lamp, a soft welcome that didn't quite reach his heart. Inside, the air smelled of dust, pine, and absence. Elias wasn't used to coming home. He wasn't sure he deserved to. But someone deserved him. Shadow. Elias's hand tightened instinctively as the thought of the dog crossed his mind. Shadow, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois, lean and deadly as a blade, had been his partner through sandstorms, explosions, ambushes, darkness. The dog bore the physique of a seasoned warrior, long legs built for speed, a chest powerful enough to tackle armed insurgents, and a sable coat that darkened to black along his spine. His ears stood alert even in sleep, his gaze sharp amber that cut, straight through lies and hesitation. Trained in detection, tracking, and assault, Shadow had saved Elias's life so many times that the math no longer mattered. When Shadow worked, he was quiet, focused, precise. When he rested, he slept lightly, dreaming with a twitch of the paws and the faintest whine. When thunder rolled, Shadow panicked. It was the single flaw in a creature engineered for bravery. Storms fractured him. Something in his past before deployment, some trauma no trainer could explain, had wired fear deep into his instincts. Elias had always been there to calm him, to keep him from spiraling. But Elias hadn't been here for 9 months. Shadow had been staying with the neighbor boy, Tyler, 16, skinny in a way that suggested he was still trying to grow into himself. Tyler had earnest green eyes and a mop of blonde hair that always fell over his forehead. He adored Shadow, though the dog never listened to him unless it involved food. Tyler had a gentle awkwardness, a habit of nervous laughter, and a tendency to ask a million questions about SEAL training. Elias answered few. Some things were better left undescribed. Tonight, as thunder cracked across the bay like artillery fire, Elias's chest tightened with that old familiar instinct, the one that woke him before explosions, the one that whispered wrong. He grabbed his duffel, walked to the porch, and paused. Something felt off. The wind slammed against the cabin, rattling shutters. Elias narrowed his eyes and scanned the property with the practiced sweep of someone who still expected enemy movement behind every shadow. Pines bent under the storm's force. The gravel path gleamed slick beneath icing rain. But what caught his attention was the open gate of Tyler's yard across the dirt road, swaying back and forth with each gust. Shadow would never leave without cause. Shadow feared storms. Shadow ran when storms swallowed the sky. Elias dropped the duffel immediately. He moved fast, silent, controlled, like a ghost sliding down the steps and across the road. Tyler's house was dark except for a flickering hallway light visible through the front window. Elias knocked once, hard. The door flew open to reveal Tyler, pale and frantic, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Mr. Kane, I'm so sorry. I tried to grab him. But the thunder, he bolted straight through the gate." Elias didn't raise his voice. Fear didn't make him loud. It made him surgical. "Where did he go?" His tone was gravel, steady but dangerous. Tyler swallowed. "Into the woods, toward the cliffs. I yelled for him, but he was terrified." Elias shut his eyes briefly, forcing his breath to stay even. Shadow had survived shrapnel, insurgents, collapsing structures. But nature got under his skin. "Which direction?" Elias asked again. Tyler pointed with a trembling hand. "North Trail, past the old cannery road." Elias clapped a hand on the boy's shoulder, firm, not unkind. "Lock your doors, stay inside. This storm's going to get worse." He didn't wait for a reply. He started moving, stride long and urgent, boots sinking into mud as he headed for the trail. Rain hit him sideways, cold as needles. Shadow out here alone, Shadow in a thunderstorm, Shadow facing God knows what. A memory surged, one he despised. Afghanistan. A collapsed compound, a trapped teammate, a decision that had arrived too late. His jaw tightened. Not again. Not this time. Not him. The trailhead was swallowed by darkness. Elias clicked on his tactical flashlight, its beam slicing through rain like a blade. He crouched low, scanning for prints. Mud, leaves, disrupted soil. Shadow was fast, and even terrified he moved with intention. Elias found the tracks quickly. Deep impressions angled sharply, showing speed and panic, but also direction. North, toward the abandoned cannery by the water. Elias cursed under his breath, not from anger, but from the cold certainty blooming in his gut. That cannery wasn't as abandoned as most people believed. Rumors passed around town, boats docking at night, lights moving where no workers had been in a decade, contraband shipments slipping past the Coast Guard, and now, Shadow heading straight into whatever lurked out there. Elias pushed deeper into the woods, muscles coiled, senses sharpening. The storm intensified, lightning ripping the sky into white shards. Every branch cracking above him could have been a threat. Every shadow between the trees could have hid more than wind. But Elias didn't stop. Branches whipped his jacket. Mud tugged at his boots. Adrenaline burned away every hesitation, leaving only focus, purpose, and fear masquerading as determination. The kind of fear only love could create. "Shadow!" he shouted into the storm, voice swallowed by thunder. "Shadow, stay! I'm coming." No answer. Only wind. He forced his legs faster. A sudden rustle snapped to his right. Low, deliberate. Elias froze instantly, shifting into tactical stance. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead as he scanned the dark. Then, a shape emerged, not human, low to the ground, hunched, wounded. Shadow limped between two cedar trunks, his silhouette shuddering with each breath. His fur was slick with rain and streaked with mud. One hind leg dragged slightly. His stance was crooked. But his eyes, those bright amber eyes, locked onto Elias with a mixture of relief and torment. The dog stumbled forward, whined, then jerked his head back toward the cliffs, toward the cannery. Elias felt it instantly. Shadow wasn't just running from fear. He was running from something he'd seen. "Show me," Elias murmured, voice thick. "Good boy. Take me." Shadow turned, limping but determined, leading Elias deeper into the dark. And, just as they approached the tree line where the woods opened toward the old cannery, a sharp sound cut through the storm, metal clanging, followed by low voices. Elias tensed, pushing Shadow gently behind him. Through the sheets of rain, beyond the twisted fence around the cannery yard, he saw them. 3 men unloading crates from an unmarked boat, flashlights swinging, weapons slung casually as if no one could possibly be watching. Contraband, armed, organized, dangerous. Elias felt everything in him shift. Not fear, not memories. Instinct. Shadow growled faintly, ears pinned back. Elias placed a steadying hand on the dog's shoulder, jaw tightening with a promise forged in bone and blood. No one touched what was his. No one threatened his team. Not again, not ever. The storm roared louder, as if remembering the name of the man who now stood on its edge, facing danger with the cold clarity of a soldier who had survived enough to understand the cost of hesitation. The night had only just begun, and Elias Kane was not going to lose anything else tonight. Maren Hale had always believed the coastline could sense a wounded heart. Perhaps that was why she felt so oddly hollow as she rode her aging scooter along the cliff road above Raven Bay that morning, the storm not yet broken, but promising danger with every gust. She leaned forward slightly against the cold wind, her hands stiff inside thin gloves that had seen too many winters. She was 26, slender and quietly strong, her dark brown hair braided loosely down her back and whipping like a pennant behind her. Her face carried soft angles, cheekbones not too sharp, jawline gentle but determined, and her skin held the healthy warmth of someone who spent more time around animals than people. Her eyes, deep brown and melancholic as an autumn afternoon, reflected a kindness that made her look younger than she felt. Maren was not fragile. She was simply the kind of person who broke for others more easily than she broke for herself. She was on her way to the Raven Bay Veterinary Training Center, a low-slung building full of anxious interns and overworked doctors. It was her last week of rotation, and she had already been warned, "Don't be late again." But she hadn't slept well. The storm churned all night, rattling her windows and stirring the strange loneliness she tried hard to pretend she didn't feel. She lived alone in a tiny rented room above an old bakery, owned by Mrs. Lockwood, 72, fiercely independent, thin as a broom handle, hair white and coiled like sea foam. Mrs. Lockwood had raised Maren after her parents died when she was 11, and though the older woman rarely showed emotion, she had placed a gentle hand on Maren's cheek that morning and whispered, "Storm's got teeth today, child. Be careful." Maren promised she would. She did not expect to almost run over a bleeding war dog. The moment she rounded the bend where the cliff leaned sharply toward the sea, she saw a dark shape slumped near the guardrail. Her breath froze. Her scooter screeched as she braked so hard she nearly tipped over. For a heartbeat, she thought it was a person. But then the shape moved, weakly, painfully, and her heart clenched. The dog was enormous and powerful even in collapse, a creature built for speed and strength. His coat, slick with rain and streaked with mud, was sable dark with warm rust patches along his legs. His ears sagged from exhaustion, and his powerful chest rose in shallow, strained breaths. One leg dragged uselessly, the fur matted with blood that washed down in thin crimson streams over the pavement. This was not a stray. No stray carried a body like a bullet fired on purpose, or eyes like amber flames dulled by pain. "Oh, God. Hey, boy. Hey," Maren whispered as she slid off her scooter and knelt beside him, ignoring the rain soaking into her jeans. The dog growled, but not at her. More like at the world. A warning that death was not here for him yet. Maren shrugged off her jacket and covered him, hands trembling as she pressed a wad of cloth against the wound. She could already smell infection starting, the sharp metallic scent of fresh blood battling the sourness of old injury. "Stay with me? Please stay with me," she murmured, voice breaking. Her training flicked through her mind. Control bleeding, stabilize the limb, keep him warm, keep him still. But she had no supplies. The dog's gaze drifted past her. His muscles twitched as though trying to get up despite the agony. Maren stroked his neck gently. "You're safe. I won't leave you." That was when she heard footsteps, heavy, purposeful, wrong. She turned. 3 men emerged from the narrow dirt path leading toward the beach below. They were not from Raven Bay. Locals didn't move with the confidence of people who thought they already owned whatever they walked toward. The man in front, broad-shouldered with a hooked nose and stubble that shadowed a square jaw, wore a gray jacket stretched tight across a muscular torso. His hair was black and slicked back from the rain, revealing a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes were mean, flat, cold, used to winning fights through intimidation alone. He was maybe late 30s, built like a longshoreman, and carried himself with the swagger of someone who had been in trouble long enough to stop caring about consequences. To his right walked a thinner man, tall and wiry, with a long neck and nervous energy coiling through his limbs. His blonde hair clung to his scalp, his pale skin almost ghost-like beneath the storm's light. His jaw was constantly shifting, teeth grinding, anxious, impatient, or maybe chemically unbalanced. The third man was older, with a thick beard peppered in gray, a broad gut, and eyes that had seen too much crime to fear any of it. He held himself with slow efficiency, like someone accustomed to carrying crates or bodies. It didn't matter which. Marin's pulse thundered. This was wrong. All of it. The leader smirked when he saw the dog. "Well, look at that," he said, voice rough like gravel soaked in oil. "The mutt made it all the way up here." The blonde one snorted. "Should have drowned after what he saw." Marin stiffened. She shielded the dog with her body. "He's injured. I'm taking him to the clinic." The 3 exchanged looks before the leader stepped forward. "No," he said, tone final and cruel. "You're leaving him. That animal saw something he wasn't supposed to. And you didn't see anything either, understand?" Marin's hands shook violently, but she didn't move from her position. "He's hurt. He needs help. You can't just abandon a living creature." The older bearded man eyed her with a strange mixture of annoyance and faint respect. "Girl, walk away. We don't want trouble." Marin swallowed hard. She had never been brave in the way soldiers or heroes were brave, but she was brave in the way people who loved without limit were brave. "No." The leader's eyes darkened. "You don't understand what you're getting in the middle of." Marin rose slowly, keeping her body between them and the wounded dog. Her soaked braid clung to her cheek, and the wind shoved against her thin frame, but she didn't waver. "I understand enough. He's terrified. He's bleeding, and you're not touching him." The thin blonde man scoffed. "She's crazy." The storm boomed overhead, as if the sky itself gasped. For a moment, all 3 men stared at her, as though confused by her stupidity, or her courage. Then the leader's lips curled into a slow, amused grin, the kind that promised violence. "You shouldn't have stopped here, sweetheart," he murmured. Marin's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her teeth. She didn't know how to fight. She barely knew how to stand her ground, but something deep inside her, a small, fierce voice whispered, "Do not run." Her parents had always said she was too soft, too gentle, too quick to sacrifice herself. They would have called her foolish now. She didn't care. The dog whimpered behind her. She angled her shoulder, hiding him from view. "I won't let you hurt him." Lightning flashed, illuminating all their faces, and for a breathless second, Marin saw something flicker in the leader's eyes. Not doubt. Recognition. As if he had seen this posture before on someone much more dangerous. His grin faded, then everything erupted at once. A sharp noise echoed behind them, boots slamming against wet asphalt. A silhouette moved out of the shadows with the kind of speed that didn't belong to an ordinary man. The 3 strangers whipped around. Too late. Elias Kane came out of the storm like a verdict. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't warn. He simply moved. 6 feet 2 inches of disciplined fury, soaked in rain, jaw locked, muscles coiled like steel cables under his jacket. His presence was immediate and overwhelming, the kind of presence that did not ask for authority because it was authority. His dark hair clung to his forehead, but his blue eyes, sharp, deadly, focused, never left the men threatening the woman and his dog. Shadow growled weakly at his feet. Elias didn't spare Marin more than a brief glance, just enough to assess her condition, soaked, trembling, but uninjured. Relief moved through him, then vanished beneath colder instincts. The leader lifted his hands half-heartedly. Easy, friend. We were just. Elias closed the distance before the man finished speaking. His fist drove into the leader's stomach, hard, controlled, precise enough to incapacitate without killing. The man folded with a strangled groan. The blond one lunged next. Elias hooked his arm, twisted, and slammed him to the ground with clinical efficiency. The older bearded man, a bit smarter, backed away, palms raised. "We don't want trouble, man," he rasped. "You found it anyway," Elias replied, voice low enough to thunder. For a moment, the storm seemed to hold its breath. The older man grabbed his two companions and dragged them toward the footpath, retreating fast. "This isn't over," he spat. Elias didn't respond. He waited until they vanished into the trees before he turned back to Marin. She had not moved. She stood trembling, eyes wide, rain dripping from her lashes. For one fragile moment, their gazes locked, two strangers bound by a wounded dog and a storm that refused to end. Elias knelt beside Shadow, assessing the leg wound with swift, experienced hands. "You kept him alive," he murmured, voice softer now, though still graveled by adrenaline. Marin swallowed. I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly what he needed." Elias lifted Shadow gently into his arms. Even injured, the dog relaxed against him with a broken whine. Elias brushed his face against Shadow's muzzle in a gesture that was both tender and fierce. "Good boy. I've got you." Marin's breath hitched. Something about the way this hardened man carried the injured animal, like he was holding the last piece of himself, made her chest ache. "Come on," Elias said, nodding toward the road. "We need to get him to the clinic." She followed, silently as the storm roared around them. The storm did not ease. It deepened, tightening around Raven Bay like a clenched fist, as Elias Kane carried Shadow across the soaked cliff road, with Marin hurrying beside him, her breath sharp in the cold air. Rain hammered the pavement in violent sheets, turning everything into a world of shifting gray, and thunder cracked overhead like old gods shouting warnings. Elias did not look up. His entire focus was on the limp, trembling body of the Malinois in his arms. Shadow's heartbeat, normally strong and steady like a war drum, now thrummed too fast, frantic, thready, a signal that set Elias's instincts roaring awake. He held the dog against his chest as though trying to transfer his own strength into that battered body. Elias Kane, the man they called unbreakable, felt something dangerously close to fear. They reached Marin's scooter, useless in the storm, so Elias kept walking toward the nearest turnout where his SUV could be reached more easily. Marin jogged to match his long strides, shivering from cold and adrenaline. Her braids slapped against her soaked back, her clothes clinging to her slender frame. She glanced at Elias, studying the rigid tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders squared as if preparing for a battlefield ambush. Even exhausted and rain-drenched, Elias looked like a force, 6'2", all dense muscle and disciplined strength, a man sculpted by years of combat and stripped of softness by things he had survived. Yet the way he held Shadow, with gentleness so careful it seemed almost fragile, contradicted everything his severe exterior suggested. Marin finally spoke, her voice trembling more from emotion than cold. "Is he going to make it?" Elias did not answer immediately. He scanned the dog again with his thumb, feeling along Shadow's ribs, gauging breaths, testing responsiveness. "He will," he said eventually, each word low, controlled, but tinged with something he couldn't hide. "He has to." The unspoken truth hovered between them. Elias needed Shadow alive in ways he hadn't needed anything else in years. They reached the SUV. Elias opened the back door with one hand, cradling Shadow carefully into the seat. Marin climbed in beside the dog, keeping pressure on the wound, while Elias moved to the driver's side. His movements were quick, tactical, crisp, the habits of a soldier whose instincts never slept. He started the engine, light slicing through the storm. For several minutes they drove in silence. Marin watched Elias through the mirror, seeing the way his fingers flexed around the steering wheel, how his eyes, sharp blue, storm bright, never stopped scanning the road, the cliffs, the forest edges. Even while driving, his posture was alert, his breath measured. Her voice was soft when she finally asked, "How did you find us?" Elias didn't look back. "Shadow," he answered simply. "He'd run in a straight panic line. I followed the trail." He paused, then added with a low, grave tone, "And I heard you scream." Marin's cheeks warmed despite the cold rain dripping from her hair. She hadn't meant to scream. She hadn't even realized she had. "I wasn't brave," she murmured. "I just couldn't let them take him." "That's bravery." Elias's reply was immediate, almost gruff, as if honesty slipped out before he could stop it. Marin blinked. Shadow stirred faintly and nudged her arm, an exhausted reassurance. Elias drove faster. When they reached the veterinary training center, most of the building lights were dim, but one section, emergency animal intake, glowed brightly through the storm. Elias parked with harsh precision. He lifted Shadow again, and his face tightened as the dog whimpered. Elias leaned down, forehead pressed briefly to Shadow's, whispering something too quiet for Marin to hear. They hurried through the doors into cold, fluorescent lighting. A middle-aged veterinary nurse, Marlene Carter, looked up in surprise. Marlene was in her early 50s, short and sturdy, with curly ginger hair pinned into a lopsided bun, freckles dotting her pale cheeks, and a no-nonsense aura that came from 2 decades of dealing with panicked pet owners and interns. Her scrubs were printed with cartoon cats, an odd contrast to the stormy night and the blood trailing from Shadow. "My lord," she breathed, stepping closer. "What happened to him?" Elias answered before Marin could. "Gunshot grazing wound on the hind leg. Possible deep muscle tear. He's gone into shock once already. He needs fluids, wound cleaning, possible stitching, or surgical exploration." Marlene blinked at him, startled not by the information, but by how he delivered it with the confidence of a man who had seen dozens of battlefield injuries. "You military?" she asked, studying him openly now, his rigid posture, the wet tactical jacket clinging to broad shoulders, the holster still strapped under his ribs. All answers were obvious. "Formerly," Elias said, voice clipped. Marin glanced at him. Formerly? Something in that single word hinted at ghosts. Marlene gestured them into the treatment room. Elias laid Shadow onto the metal table with extraordinary gentleness, then stepped back exactly 1 pace, close enough to intervene, far enough to let the professionals move. As Marlene worked, shaving fur, cleaning the wound, administering fluids, Shadow growled softly, not at her, but at the pain. Elias stood so still, it seemed he did not breathe. Marin washed her hands, grabbed gloves, and assisted seamlessly. She moved with steady confidence now, her earlier fear replaced by clinical focus. Elias watched her hands, small but precise, and felt a strange sense of gratitude. She had not run from danger. She had run toward a wounded creature that wasn't hers. That mattered. When the wound was finally cleaned and Shadow sedated, Marlene exhaled. "He's a strong one. He'll need rest and antibiotics, but he'll pull through." Elias lowered his head briefly, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. Relief hit him like a punch. Marin stepped closer, her voice gentle. "He'll be okay. You kept him alive too." Elias didn't answer, couldn't. For a moment, he let the walls around him slip just enough for her to see something raw and haunted in his eyes. But then, the walls returned. A knock at the door snapped their attention up. A tall man entered, Deputy Conrad Briggs, early 40s, lean and angular with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, sandy brown hair unkempt from the rain, and gray eyes that missed nothing. His tan uniform clung to his lanky frame, and his expression, a mixture of suspicion and responsibility, made him look like someone who had seen too much petty crime to be surprised by real danger. Briggs had lost his brother 5 years earlier in a boating accident during a storm, and ever since he carried risk like a personal insult. He glanced at the blood on the floor, the injured dog, the 2 soaked civilians, and sighed heavily. "We got a report of 3 men fleeing the cliffs. You 2 involved?" Marin spoke first. "They attacked the dog. They threatened me. Elias stopped them." Elias didn't move, didn't soften, didn't volunteer anything. Briggs noticed. "You military?" he asked. Elias gave the same answer as before. "Formerly." Briggs nodded slowly, weighing him. "You planning to file a report?" "No." Elias's voice was flat. "Not yet." Briggs frowned. "You're aware they'll be back. Criminal groups don't enjoy being interrupted." Elias stepped forward, towering over the lanky deputy with calm intimidation. "They won't find her alone again." Something in the way he said it, not loud, not aggressive, simply factual, made Briggs drop the subject. Briggs took a few notes, then looked at Marin. "Miss Hale, are you sure you're unharmed?" Marin nodded but hugged her elbows slightly. Briggs softened just a little. "If anything else happens, you call me. The storm's bringing out desperate types." He left. Silence settled after the door clicked shut. Marlene wiped her hands. "He'll sleep until morning," she said, nodding at Shadow. Elias nodded once. "Thank you." Marlene hesitated, looking between Elias and Marin. Her voice softened. "Most people wouldn't have stopped on the cliff road. You did good, girl." Marine's cheeks warmed. When Marlene left, Elias finally sat, only then revealing the exhaustion dragging at him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed slightly. Marin sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Eventually, Marin whispered, "You said, formerly. What does that mean?" Elias stared at the floor. "It means the Navy thinks I need time. It means I made a call during an op that cost someone their freedom. Maybe their life. And until they know what to do with me, I'm here." Marin's heart tightened. She had felt the weight in him, but hearing it aloud made it real. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elias looked at her then, really looked at her. Her eyes were gentle but strong, holding the kind of compassion that made people like him wary because compassion demanded vulnerability. "Don't," he said softly. "Don't be sorry. Just thank you." For him? Marin placed her hand on the table beside Shadow, close to Elias's but not touching. "Shadow didn't run to die. He ran looking for help, and he found me." "And I found you," Elias said before he could stop himself. Marin's breath caught. A low rumble echoed outside, thunder shifting farther away. The storm still raged, but something inside the treatment room eased. Something small, fragile, quietly hopeful. Elias stood. "I'm staying. I'm not leaving him alone." Marin smiled faintly. "I wasn't planning to leave either." They settled into chairs on either side of Shadow, separated by the sleeping dog, but bound by the strange gravity of what the night had forced them to share. Elias rested one hand lightly on Shadow's ribs. Marin rested her hand near the dog's paw. The storm hammered against the windows, but inside, 3 battered souls, one soldier, one healer, one loyal dog, found an unexpected stillness. Outside, danger still waited. Inside, something new had begun. Morning crept into the veterinary clinic, not with light, but with a soft gray haze, a quiet reminder that the storm outside had not fully surrendered. The windows rattled occasionally as leftover gusts scraped against the glass, and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air like a sterile blanket draped over exhaustion. Inside the dimly lit recovery room, Marin Hale sat slumped in a plastic chair beside Shadow's kennel, her head tilted to one side in a half-doze brought on by adrenaline collapse. She had not meant to fall asleep, but the night had pulled her strength in too many directions. Her braid had loosened, stray strands curling damply around her face, and her thin sweatshirt, borrowed from the clinic locker, looked a size too big on her narrow shoulders. Elias Kane stood beside her, not sitting, not resting, simply existing in the taut quiet of someone who did not know how to let his guard down. He was too tall for the cramped room. Even slouched slightly, his presence filled it. His wet jacket hung on the back of a door, leaving him in a plain black t-shirt that stretched across a chest built from years of punishing training. The shirt clung to him, revealing carved muscle, heavy shoulders, and arms marked by faint scars, lines of past battles that traced the map of a life lived in conflict. His jaw was rough with shadowy stubble now, the kind that made his face look even more chiseled, but it was the look in his eyes that dominated him. Blue-gray, sharp, restless, like a storm that never fully dissipated. He watched Shadow breathe. He watched Marin breathe. He watched everything. A soldier's instinct never slept, and neither did the wounds it tried to protect. A soft footstep approached, and Elias turned sharply. Too sharply, before realizing it was only Marlene Carter returning from the storage area with a fresh bag of fluids. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with a tired smile. "You two look like you went a few rounds with the storm, and then some," she said. Marin blinked awake, rubbing her eyes. Elias did not move. Marlene shook her head affectionately. In the daylight, she looked older than she had last night. Her curly ginger hair was frizzing from humidity, her eyes lined by years of caretaking, but they shone with a warmth that made her appear almost motherly. "Coffee's brewing," she announced. "I made it strong enough to resurrect the dead." Marin gave a weak laugh. Elias didn't, but he inclined his head politely. Marlene entered the room fully now, checking Shadow's vitals with practiced efficiency. "His pulse is stronger. Tremors are down. The sedative is doing its job." She placed a hand gently on Shadow's side. "He's a fighter." Elias's throat tightened. "He always has been." Marin watched the way Elias looked at Shadow, not as a pet, not even as a partner, but as a lifeline. There was a fierce tenderness there, one forged not through sentiment, but through survival. When Marlene left the room again, the quiet returned, broken only by the soft beeps of monitors. Marin tucked her legs under her, shivering slightly. Elias noticed. Without a word, he reached for his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The fabric was still faintly warm. Marin's breath hitched. "You don't have to." "I know," Elias said. His voice was low, gravel-edged with fatigue. "But you're freezing." Her eyes lifted to his, soft and searching. "What about you?" Elias leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "I don't get cold easily." It wasn't bravado, it was simply true, carved into him by deserts and oceans and nights spent awake on roofs scanning for danger. Marin rubbed her arms beneath the jacket, overwhelmed by how much it smelled like rain and cedar and something distinctly him. "You did well last night," Elias said suddenly, surprising her. "Better than most people I've met. Better than some soldiers." Marin blinked. "I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Elias replied softly. "It's what you do with it." Their eyes met in the dim room. Something unspoken lingered, warm and fragile. Then Shadow whimpered in his sleep, breaking the moment. Marin rose and knelt beside the kennel. She spoke softly to the dog, her hand gentle on his paw. Elias watched her as if observing a miracle. People rarely impressed him. He had seen humans fail under pressure too many times. But Marin had chosen danger without hesitation for a creature she didn't know. That wasn't normal. It was extraordinary. He cleared his throat. "What made you stop on the road?" Marin glanced back at him. "I heard something. Not just the storm, a kind of pain. I couldn't ignore it." Elias studied her. Her answer was simple, but her eyes revealed the truth. She had felt Shadow's fear before she even saw him. Not everyone could sense suffering like that. Only the deeply empathetic, the people who carried wounds of their own. He recognized it because he carried the same fracture lines inside himself. "You remind me of someone," Elias murmured. Marin tilted her head. "Who?" He turned away slightly. "Someone I trusted. Someone I couldn't save." She didn't push further. She sensed instinctively that whatever memory he carried was barbed, wrapped in guilt. Instead, she sat on the floor near Shadow and let silence settle between them, a silence not of avoidance, but of gentle permission. A small knock startled them. The door opened to reveal Dr. Owen Mercer, the clinic's senior veterinarian, just beginning his morning shift. He was in his mid-40s, tall but slightly stooped from years of leaning over operating tables, with sandy hair already graying at the temples and a trim beard softening an otherwise angular jaw. His eyes were a thoughtful hazel, framed by faint wrinkles that hinted at both laughter and late nights reviewing medical charts. His scrubs were immaculate despite the early hour, and his demeanor calm, steady, patient. The kind of man who healed because he believed in the quiet sanctity of living things. "I hear we had excitement last night," Dr. Mercer said as he approached. "Let's take a look at our guest." He crouched by Shadow, examining the leg with careful hands. His fingers were long, practiced, gentle. Elias watched closely, muscles tightening with every slight movement. Dr. Mercer noticed. "I promise I'm not breaking him," he said with a smile. "He'll be okay, Mr. Kane," Elias said. "Elias Kane." Mercer nodded. "Mr. Kane, your dog is lucky. Another hour without treatment and the shock could have taken him." Elias exhaled slowly. "Noted." Mercer stood, stretching slightly. "He'll need rest and ongoing care, but he's strong and clearly well-trained." Elias nodded once. He served? Mercer didn't press details. He recognized a boundary when he saw one. Instead, he turned to Marin. And you? I heard you were part of the rescue. Marin swallowed. I just tried to keep him alive until help arrived. Mercer gave her a warm, approving look. That's exactly what a good vet does. Proud of you. Marin blushed. Elias felt something strange twist in his chest at that, the echo of pride mixed with something gentler. Mercer left to finish his rounds. Elias and Marin remained in the small room with Shadow, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Marin stood, stretching wearily. I should go check on Mrs. Lockwood. She worries. Elias nodded. I'll stay with him. Marin hesitated at the door. You need rest too. Not until he's out of danger. Marin stared at him a moment, seeing the exhaustion he refused to acknowledge, the trembling hidden in his fingers, the shadows pooling beneath his eyes. You don't have to do it alone, she said softly. Elias met her gaze. I do everything alone. Marin stepped closer. You don't have to. The words hit him harder than a punch. He looked away. Go home, eat, sleep. Marin gave him a small, warm smile. Okay, but I'll be back. She left, and the room felt colder without her. Hours passed. Shadow slept, breathing steady. Elias didn't move except to adjust the dog's blanket or refill water. Every so often he touched Shadow's fur, grounding himself. By late afternoon, the storm had finally weakened into a drizzle. The clinic grew quieter. Dr. Mercer checked in occasionally. Marlene brought Elias a sandwich he barely touched. The world outside continued, but for Elias, everything narrowed to this room, this dog, this moment suspended between past wounds and uncertain futures. When evening approached, the door opened again. Marin stepped inside, wearing dry clothes, a simple green sweater and dark jeans that fit her slender frame. Her hair, now brushed, fell loose around her shoulders, softening her entire presence. She carried a small thermos. Mrs. Lockwood made soup, she said, smiling. She said you look like someone who forgets to eat. Elias blinked, uncertain how to respond. Marin set the thermos beside him. How's he doing? Elias glanced at Shadow. Stable. Marin sat beside him, knees brushing his lightly. The contact startled him, not because it was unwelcome, but because he felt it too much. She looked at him quietly, studying him the way she studied wounded animals, with patience, gentleness, and respect for pain that wasn't visible. Elias, she murmured, who's going to save you from your own hurt? The question struck him like lightning. For a long time he said nothing, jaw clenched, breath tight, eyes fixed on Shadow. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher. I don't know. Marin didn't push. She simply placed her hand near his, close enough for warmth, far enough for choice. Elias's fingers twitched, the tiniest crack in armor he had worn for years. Outside, the storm clouds parted slightly, letting a thin, hopeful band of evening light spill across the clinic floor. Inside, something softened in Elias. Just a fraction, just enough for possibility. Healing, he realized, required a courage different from war. And Marin had that courage. Maybe she could teach him. Maybe he wanted her to. Shadow shifted, placing his paw over Elias's boot. Marin smiled. Elias exhaled. The beginning of something new settled quietly between the three of them, fragile, uncertain, but alive. The week that followed unfolded like the slow, careful stitching of a wound, each day pulling together threads of fear, relief, and unexpected hope. Raven Bay, usually a sleepy coastal community wrapped in salty mist and silence, seemed to breathe easier now that the storm had passed, both the literal one and the human-made violence that had crawled ashore with it. The smugglers who had chased Maran and injured Shadow were arrested at dawn 3 days earlier. The police had followed Elias's meticulous account, along with the trail Shadow had left in the wet sand and pine needles. Elias had identified each suspect with the cool precision of a man trained to analyze threats in seconds. The officers who interviewed him, Chief Danvers and Deputy Rollins, had been almost taken aback by his clarity. Chief Danvers, a broad-shouldered man with a salt-and-pepper beard and an air of weary authority, shook Elias's hand and said, "If you ever leave the Navy, son, I have a detective's badge waiting for you." Elias gave a restrained half-smile, but inside, a complicated knot twisted in his chest. He didn't know who he was outside of combat roles, outside of missions, outside of Shadow. But maybe, just maybe, that answer was beginning to shift. Meanwhile, Shadow recovered with a swiftness that amazed even Dr. Mercer. The Malinois moved through his healing like a battlefield lieutenant, slow at first, favoring the injured leg, but regaining strength with the determination of an animal who had survived too much to give up now. His coat regained its sheen, his eyes sharpened with alertness, and the moment he could stand without wobbling, he did so with a proud, almost regal stance. Marin visited Shadow every morning. She brought small treats she baked herself, soft biscuits shaped like little bones, infused with healing herbs recommended by Dr. Mercer. At first, Shadow sniffed them suspiciously, but after the second day, he accepted them eagerly, tail sweeping the air like a warrior acknowledging respect. Elias, who tried not to show how closely he watched her each morning, found himself waiting for the sound of her footsteps long before she arrived. Marin always knocked gently before stepping inside the recovery room, even though Elias told her she didn't need to. "Habit," she said, smiling shyly. "Good habits matter." Elias wanted to tell her that she was, herself, becoming a habit he wasn't prepared to break. But he didn't know how to say it yet, so each day he simply nodded, stepping back as she approached Shadow, yet unable to stop his gaze from lingering on her. She looked different in the soft morning light each time she came, sometimes wearing her pale blue hoodie, sometimes her dark green knit sweater, sometimes with her hair in a loose braid, other times falling freely over her shoulders. But always, always with those gentle brown eyes that saw more than most people wished to show. And somehow, she always saw him. Not, oh, the soldier. Not the hardened edges. Him. On the 7th morning, Dr. Mercer cleared Shadow to return home. "He'll still need light activity and no running for another week," the vet warned, tapping Shadow's flank gently. "But he's ready to leave the clinic." Elias nodded, relieved beyond words. Marin clapped her hands softly, joy sparking across her face. "He'll love being near the ocean again." Elias glanced at her, something warm flickering inside. "You should come by," he said before he could stop himself. "He responds well to you." Marin's cheeks flushed. "I'd like that." Shadow barked once as if voicing his agreement, startling everyone into a laugh. The following dawn bloomed soft and gold over Raven Bay. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving the air smelling new, washed, filled with the scent of seaweed and lingering dreams. Elias stood on the sandy path leading from his cabin to the shoreline, Shadow trotting beside him with renewed vigor. Shadow's gait was slower than usual, but steady. He wore a new harness, black, durable, military grade, but with a soft blue tag Marin had attached secretly the day before that read, "Come home safe." Elias pretended not to notice, but it had made something in him crack open, delicate as a sprouting leaf, relentless as truth. When they reached the beach, Elias froze. Marin was already there. She stood with her boots half buried in the sand, hands tucked inside her sweater sleeves, her hair tangled gently by the ocean wind. And her eyes, her warm brown eyes, held a brightness like sunlight after too many storms. She turned when she sensed them, smiling in a way that made the entire bay feel warmer. "You're early," she teased. Elias's chest tightened. "Couldn't sleep." Marin nodded as if she understood more than he said, because she did. The waves curled toward the shore in glowing ribbons, touched by the newborn sun. Shadow barked happily and trotted toward Marin, tail high. She knelt beside him, her hands brushing through his fur with gentle affection. "You're looking stronger every day," she whispered to him. Shadow leaned into her touch, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude. Elias watched them for a moment, the image so peaceful it almost didn't fit inside a life like his. Marin stood, brushing sand from her knees. "So," she said, her smile widening, "you said Shadow wanted to thank me." Elias cleared his throat. "He does." He paused. "I do too." Marin tilted her head. "What for?" Elias looked at the horizon, then back at her with an intensity that almost frightened him with its honesty. "For saving him, for staying that night, for not running when danger came, for reminding me what hope looks like." Her breath stilled. Elias took a step closer, then another, until the space between them was barely the width of a heartbeat. "You pulled me out of something dark," he said softly, each word heavy and true. "Something I thought was permanent." Marin's voice trembled. "And now?" Elias inhaled deeply. "Now I'm starting to believe the darkness wasn't a destination, just a place I got stuck." Marin swallowed. "And you're not stuck anymore?" Elias looked at her the way a man looks at the first sunrise after a long deployment, awed, humbled, undone. "Not with you here." Shadow barked once, loud and sudden, as if impatient with the lack of physical contact. Marin laughed, the sound sparkling like shattered sunlight on water. "Shadow thinks we're being dramatic," she said. "Shadow's impatient," Elias replied, eyes softening. The dog barked again, tail thumping. Marin took a small step closer, looking up at Elias with hopeful uncertainty. "So," she whispered, "what now?" Elias gently took her hand. His fingers were calloused, warm, steady, hands that had broken, built, fought, protected. Her smaller hand settled into his as though it had always belonged there. He squeezed lightly. She squeezed back. The sunrise unfurled across the sky, painting Elias's strong features in amber. The sharp cheekbones, the powerful jaw, the scar faintly visible near his temple, the eyes that looked like storms learning how to clear. Marin's voice trembled again, barely audible. "Does this mean you're thanking me too?" Elias smiled, slow, rare, breathtaking. "Yeah," he murmured. "It means that." Shadow trotted in a small circle around them, tail wagging wildly, barking as if announcing something sacred to the sea. Elias and Marin laughed, the sound blending with the breaking waves, and there, in the golden breath of morning, they stood together, man, woman, dog, held not by tragedy, not by fear, but by something gentler yet stronger, a promise, a beginning, a family shaped by storms and delivered to calm waters. Elias bent his forehead toward hers. Marin didn't pull away. The world seemed to hush in reverence. And in the first light of Raven Bay's most beautiful dawn, they found not just healing, but each other. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or flashing skies. Sometimes they come quietly, in the form of a wounded dog who refuses to give up, a soldier learning to breathe again after years of darkness, or a young woman who chooses kindness even when fear stands in her way. Life rarely gives us perfect moments, but it often gives us people and creatures who remind us that healing is possible, that love can rise from the ashes, and that even the most damaged hearts can find their way back into the light. Maybe your miracle won't look dramatic. Maybe it will look like a friend who stands by you, a stranger who helps when they don't have to, or a small nudge from God reminding you that you're not walking alone. Hold on to those gentle miracles. Let them shape you, guide you, and soften the world around you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe so our family of light grows stronger every day. And now, may God bless you. May He protect your home, watch over your loved ones, strengthen your steps, and surround you with kindness in a world that sometimes forgets how to be gentle. If you believe in the power of hope and God's grace, type Amen in the comments below.